is week 3 in my Yoga Within the Four Agreements meditation series. And just a little bit of overview. The last few weeks, we've been covering the first 2 agreements. The first one was to not take things personally. The first one was to be impeccable with your words. So it's all about practicing the art of satya, or being truthful and forthright with our words. Second week was about not taking things personally by practicing going inwards, practicing svadhyaya, which is one of the niyamas as well, and doing a lot of self-reflection to understand more about our own inner state before we start to pass judgment on how others are behaving or things that they're saying, and not internalizing everything immediately. And these are all things that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. So I'm really excited about I'm really excited about week 3 because it's something that I do quite a lot. The third agreement in Don Miguel Ruiz's book is to not make assumptions. So just a little bit of backstory for anyone who hasn't heard of the Four Agreements. It is a book written by the author Don Miguel Ruiz, and it's based on ancient Toltec wisdom. And pretty much is just serving like as a sort of guideline for ways that humans can incorporate these different principles into their lives and live a little bit more joyfully, a little bit more peacefully. And he talks about how we unconsciously have a multitude of agreements that we've made in our lifetime. And there's thousands and thousands of just small little building blocks of agreements that we make. And this can come in the form of beliefs and values and limitations. And this obstructive cloud of beliefs can create what he refers to as mitote, or sort of this clutter of voices in our heads. And it's very similar to the principle of chittavrittis in yogic philosophy, which has to do with mental chatter and this noise that kind of obstructs our ability to just see the truth in front of us. So really the objective of the series is to tie these 4 agreements that he's identified for us to yogic philosophy, into the limbs of yoga, so that we can better understand ways that we can incorporate this into our life. And as I mentioned, this week we're going to be talking about the 3rd agreement, which is to not make assumptions. And the yogic philosophy that I chose to incorporate for this week's lesson, or this week's meditation, I'll say, is to practice APARIGRAHA, which is another one of the niyamas as well, based on not being possessive and not hoarding things. So we'll talk through a little bit about the agreement itself, a little bit about APARIGRAHA, and then ways that we can incorporate both. So before we get started, welcome to anyone who joined a few minutes after. We're going to get started right away into the meditation. So let's start by just settling into a nice, easeful posture. You can just cross your legs simply and sit in Sukhasana. You can lay down if you like in Shavasana. If you're able to maintain presence and alertness, that's great. Feel free to use a pillow or a wall behind you to support if you'd like. Get nice and comfortable. And when you're ready, go ahead and let your eyelids flutter to a close. Seal the lips and start breathing deeply in through the nostril, drawing the breath in, sipping it in. Hold for a moment at the top, feeling the air swirl around, activate through your tissues and your muscles. And exhale, matching the length of your inhale. Inhale. Feel the air as it fills your chest. Feel your chest rise, the belly expand. And exhale, push the air out, flattening your navel to your spine, letting the chest fall back in. Repeat this a few more times as you just settle into the breath, get connected. Every week I offer an affirmation or a mantra that you can keep in mind and practice if you like, that will help affirm the techniques that we're practicing. So this week, our technique is to not make assumptions and to let go of assumptions. So I'll give you two options. The first one, on your inhale, I learn. On your exhale, so I can know. And this one's based on the idea that without learning, without taking in facts constantly and remaining curious, we don't actually know. We assume, but we can't know unless we learn and we ask to learn. So I learn to know. Your second option, if you'd like to focus more on the idea of letting go and not hoarding onto beliefs and being open to learning, on your inhale, I let go. On the exhale, to learn. So go ahead and if you like, you can take one of these and anytime you just come back to the breath. Feel free to reaffirm what we're learning together by using these mantras. So the third agreement teaches us that when we make assumptions, we're fabricating the truth out of thin air, out of nothing. And in doing so, we create a world of pain and suffering for ourselves, one that maybe wasn't there before. We see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear. And all this just because making assumptions can be far easier than just communicating and learning. So take a moment here and just ask yourself how assumptions show up in your life. Where in your life do you observe yourself jumping to conclusions? Maybe thinking the worst about someone, or maybe even if you go down the what if pathway when you're presented with conflict and you start exploring all these avenues of ways that something could go badly, when really there is no way of knowing how something might actually end up turning out. So just take a moment and reflect back on your life and just observe without judgment where you've seen yourself make assumptions. So in thinking about this, I chose to break down assumptions into a few different buckets that I found myself most commonly making them in. So the first I found is that assumptions can be relational, they can be between people. So let's reflect on the last time that we made an assumption about someone else in our life, someone that we have some form of relationship with, whether it's good or bad, someone we just met. And trace your thoughts as you recall this memory. Trace your thoughts back to the genesis of the assumption that you made. Was it fair? Was it necessary? Why did you make the assumption? And here is arguably the most important question. How did you feel after you made this assumption? One could definitely say that we learn to make assumptions about others because we practice on ourselves first. It's so integral to the way society works that we judge ourselves, that we believe limitations that other people put on us, tell us what we can and can't do, can and can't achieve, can and can't feel. And we use all these rules and guidelines to start assuming things about ourselves and eventually project these onto the people that we meet. And again, we see these people the way we want to see them and the way that we want to hear them. We don't always see people as they really are. So, knowing that this often starts with ourselves, what is the last assumption you made about yourself? And again, like before, trace your thoughts back to the onset, the genesis of this assumption, peeling back the layers until you get to that starting point, asking yourself, what led you to think this way about yourself? Do you truly believe this about yourself? Perhaps were you avoiding something or anticipating a certain reaction? And sometimes the assumptions we make don't directly have to do with people, whether it's ourselves or others. Sometimes the assumptions that we make have to do with situations or the outcome of a certain situation. And once again, tracing this assumption and this conclusion back to the starting point, ask yourself what this assumption was based on. Were there context clues that you picked up on or that you maybe magnified? chose to focus on. Sometimes the mind moves so quickly that we will take one fact, one piece of information, and jump 4 steps ahead without realizing that the 3 steps in between were all assumptions, maybe not based in fact. After things unfolded, seeing how it turned out, how did you feel about your initial assumption? Regardless of if your assumption was right or wrong, did it bring you peace to anticipate? Now, we've done a lot of deep diving into our personal history with assumptions and with assuming things about people, limiting ourselves, jumping to conclusions. Take a few moments here, a few cleansing breaths to clear your mind and prepare yourself to take on some new perspective and maybe some new techniques that will help us let go of this behavior. Maybe repeat back the chosen mantra if you'd like to go with either one of them. I learn to know, or I let go to learn. Reset for a moment here. Now, how does yoga fit into this? Don Miguel Ruiz says in his book that to become free, to become liberated, we need to let go of these assumptions so that our mind has room to learn, to observe things as they really are. So imagine that you're spring cleaning. It's about that time of year. So let's just assume that we're doing a bit of spring cleaning. And you, let's say, clear out about half of the things you own out of your home, that is. However, you bring them out of the nooks and crannies, you take them out of the shelves, out of the cabinets, under the bed. You put everything out there and you say, I don't want these things anymore. So maybe what do we do next? Maybe we put them in boxes and package them up, put some tape on them. But instead of giving them away or getting rid of them or selling them, even, imagine that we put them in little storage units, out of sight, definitely, but maybe not really out of mind. They're still attached to us in some way. They're still holding us back from being lighter, from truly making space in our lives for better things, for more productive things, maybe for objects that could bring us more joy, be more functional, help us be happier. Similarly, it's definitely an excellent step for us to recognize how and when these assumptions show up in our lives. And one part of that is recognizing the difference between when we make an assumption and when we're just getting information so that we can make a more informed decision. We're always taking in information consciously and unconsciously, and that's obviously going to affect our decisions and our perception of people. But when we choose to act on that information in a way that holds us back, perhaps that adds a bit of heaviness, a bit of unnecessary burden into our day to day. So, how do we truly let go of these assumptions and lighten our load? This is where APARIGRAHA, the art of letting go, of being non possessive, comes in. I came across a quote that I really, really liked that I think it describes it pretty well. APARIGRAHA allows us to pack lightly for this journey of life, to pack lightly. So, as I mentioned, as we move through life, we're adding things into our carry on as we go. We're adding perceptions and assumptions and information and opinions. We're taking all these into our carry on. And every time we stop for a layover, maybe we can reassess which things are really essential, which things we need, or maybe which things we just hold on to because they're comforting and predictable. Making assumptions is really, it's one variation of hoarding. We're hoarding beliefs about people. We're hoarding limitations. And it's a courageous act to let go of assumptions because we open ourselves up to the unknown, to being surprised by people, by ourselves. When we hold on to these beliefs, we hold ourselves captive and limit our worldview. And when we start to let go of these expectations of how things will turn out, how people will act, what you will say or what you will believe, we liberate ourselves in the process. We return to a more childlike state where we're experiencing things for the first time with no knowledge of how it's going to turn out. As we know, making assumptions is a survival mechanism. It's a comfort blanket, and those things do not go easily. And it takes a lot of practice and a lot of commitment and patience to actually let go. So, how can we actually incorporate this into our lives? Maybe as a first step, we can start by just becoming aware when a belief comes up. And I say belief interchangeably with assumption or expectation. When something comes up, a piece of knowledge that pops up in our head without really having any evidence to support it, maybe we start by just recognizing it when that thought pops up. When perhaps we're at the gym and we're feeling a bit fatigued, but we have one more repetition of our exercise to do, and we say, I can't do it. Maybe that's the moment we pause and reflect. Or maybe you're having an argument with your friend or your manager or your family member, and they say something, or you pick up on a little bit of body language and you say, wow, this person really doesn't wish me well, or this person doesn't want to resolve this issue. Maybe just catch yourself in that moment and ask yourself, there's a distinction here. If we feel light, maybe we're just taking in information. But if we immediately feel burdened by what we're observing, perhaps it's an assumption. So, what do we do with that? If we feel burdened, can we detach ourselves from the expectation of how things might turn out? Can we then ask questions to clarify, collect information, as if this is brand new to us, as if we've never experienced it before? And maybe then we can make that informed decision with less burden on ourselves to believe everything that we have experienced and rather experiencing things anew. I learn so that I can know. I let go so I can learn. And you can even use these back to back to really reaffirm these steps that we just covered. I let go so I can learn. Freeing yourself of expectations so that your mind has the opportunity to form new associations. I learn to know. And as you take in this new information, you can come to a point of realization in the present moment. I let go to learn, and I learn to know. When you're ready, gently start waking up the body. Maybe gently flutter your eyelids open, slowly lifting your gaze, coming back into your body, tuning into your awareness. Thank you all so much for joining for week 3 of this meditation series. I hope that you were able to reflect a little bit on how assumptions play a role in your life, and maybe pick up a technique or two on ways that we can work towards letting go of these assumptions and liberating ourselves slowly.